The gardener left work earlier every day, until his boss decided to follow him. Richard Johnson watched through the tinted glass of his top-floor office. Once again, exactly at 4 in the afternoon, the gardener gathered his tools and walked toward the main gate of the complex. The businessman clenched his fists, feeling irritation rise in his throat. It was the 5th time that week Anthony had left early. The workday ended at 5, but the man seemed to have an urgent commitment every day at the same time. Richard had built his fortune on discipline and strict adherence to rules, and this behavior deeply bothered him. "Mr. Richard, you asked me to let you know when it was time for the meeting with the board members," said Karen, his secretary, lightly knocking on the half-open door. "Cancel it. I have something more important to handle today," he replied, grabbing his car keys. Richard went down to the garage and waited a few minutes before leaving. He didn't want Anthony to notice he was being followed. The gardener walked slowly down the sidewalk, carrying a plastic bag that looked heavy. Where on earth was he going with that? The businessman kept his distance, driving slowly a few streets behind. Anthony turned left onto a street Richard knew well, a simpler area of the neighborhood where there were still some empty lots. The gardener stopped in front of a fenced-in plot that had seen better days. Richard parked a block away and decided to continue on foot. He hid behind a tree and watched carefully. Anthony opened the gate with a key from his pocket and stepped inside. That was when Richard heard it. Barking. Lots of barking coming from inside. The businessman moved closer, trying to understand what was happening. Through a gap in the fence, he saw Anthony opening the bag and pulling out containers of food. Dozens of dogs appeared from every corner of the lot, running toward the man as if it were a daily ritual. "So I see now, my loves, there's enough for everyone," Anthony murmured, carefully dividing portions into small dishes scattered on the ground. Richard stood there watching the scene for nearly an hour. He saw how Anthony knew each animal by name, how some came for special affection, how the gardener checked that everyone was eating and healthy. It wasn't just feeding, it was pure love. By the time Anthony finally left the lot, Richard had already returned to his car. The entire drive home, he couldn't get the image out of his head. What was that man doing? Where did all that food come from? And most importantly, how did he manage to care for all those animals there? The next morning, Richard arrived at the office earlier. He wanted to observe Anthony working to better understand who this employee was, someone he'd known for over 3 years but knew almost nothing about. Anthony was pruning the rose bushes in the main garden when Richard went down to talk to him. The gardener wore a faded blue cap, his hands calloused from years of working the soil. His movements were precise, careful, as if each plant were special. "Good morning, Anthony. How are the gardens today?" "Good morning, Mr. Richard. They're doing well, sir. The roses are blooming beautifully. Just look," Anthony said, pointing to the buds just beginning to open. "You enjoy what you do, don't you?" "Yes, sir. I've always had a way with plants since I was little. My mother used to say I had a green thumb." Richard looked around. It was true. Ever since Anthony had taken over the complex's gardens, everything had become more beautiful and well kept. The plants had a special vitality. The colors were brighter. There was a care here that went beyond professionalism. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. For the rest of the morning, Richard discreetly observed Anthony. The gardener worked diligently, spoke politely to the residents passing by, and seemed genuinely concerned with every detail of the landscaping. But at 4 in the afternoon, as usual, he gathered his things and headed for the gate. This time Richard decided to confront him directly. "Anthony, I need to talk to you." The gardener stopped and turned, slightly startled. Richard rarely spoke to the staff, usually relaying all instructions through the building manager. "Yes, sir. Is there a problem with my work?" "Actually, yes. I've noticed you've been leaving early regularly. The workday ends at 5. Anthony lowered his head and stayed silent for a few seconds. Richard could see the man was nervous, fidgeting with the strap of the bag he carried. "You're right, Mr. Johnson. I have been leaving early." "Why? Do you have another job? Some problem at home?" It's complicated to explain, sir. Try me. I have time." Anthony looked around as if searching for an escape. His eyes held a mix of fear and sadness that Richard hadn't expected to see. "I take care of some animals, sir. Strays that have no one. If I don't go feed them every day, they'll starve." The honesty of the answer took Richard by surprise. He had expected an elaborate excuse, a lie, anything but that simple, straightforward sincerity. "How many are there?" "About 20 or so, sir. There were more, but I managed to get some adopted." "Where do you get food for all of them?" "Oh, I collect leftovers from the restaurant here in the complex. Ask some neighbors to save bones when they cook meat, and sometimes I buy kibble when I can stretch my paycheck." Richard was impressed by how organized it all was. This wasn't just a charitable impulse. It was a structured project, a daily commitment Anthony had taken on. "And how long have you been doing this?" "About 2 years, sir. It started when the neighborhood shelter closed. The animals were left on the streets with nowhere to go. I couldn't let them starve." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Patricia, Richard's daughter, who had come to pick him up for the lunch they'd planned. The 22-year-old drove a yellow BMW and wore designer clothes that cost more than Anthony's monthly salary. "Dad, you're not going to be late again, are you?" she said, not even glancing at the gardener. "I'll be right there, sweetheart. Just finishing a talk with Anthony here." Patricia looked at the gardener for the first time, noticing his simple clothes and dirt-stained hands. "Oh, okay." "Hi," she said flatly, turning her attention back to her phone. Richard noticed Anthony's discomfort at his daughter's coldness. The gardener seemed to shrink, as if he wanted to disappear. "Well, Anthony, we'll talk more about this tomorrow. You can go." "Thank you, sir. Enjoy your lunch." During lunch, Richard told Patricia about his discovery regarding the dogs. The young woman's reaction was exactly what he'd expected. "Dad, that's theft. The man is being paid to work until 5 and is leaving at 4 every day. Plus, he's taking food from the complex without permission. You have to fire him." "He's doing a good thing, sweetheart. Taking care of abandoned animals. A good thing with your company's time and resources. It's not his problem if there are stray dogs on the street. Everyone should mind their own business." Richard chewed his food in silence, thinking about his daughter's words. On one hand, she was right about the professional issue. On the other hand, there was something about Anthony's dedication that moved him in a way he couldn't explain. "Do you know how much you lose each year with employees leaving an hour early?" Patricia continued. "It's simple math, Dad. 21 workdays a month, times 12 months, times 1 hour of wages. It's a considerable amount." "And do you know how much I save by having a well-kept garden that adds value to the property?" Richard countered. "Dad, you're mixing things up. One thing is him doing a good job, another is him sticking to the schedule. You could hire someone who does both." That night, Richard couldn't sleep well. He kept thinking about his conversation with Anthony, his daughter's reaction, and the scene he had witnessed on the lot. There was something more there, something he wasn't fully understanding. The next day, he decided to follow Anthony again. This time, he wanted to observe more closely how that routine of caring for the animals worked. He arrived at the lot just minutes after the gardener and hid in the same spot as the day before. Anthony opened the gate and was greeted by the same chorus of barks and wagging tails. But this time, Richard noticed details he had missed before. Some of the dogs limped, others had wounds that seemed to be treated. There were bowls of fresh water scattered in the shade, and Richard could see someone had improvised shelters with planks and tarps to protect the animals from the rain. "How's that paw today, honey?" Anthony said, crouching beside a yellow dog that seemed to favor one of its hind legs. "I'll take you to the vet tomorrow, okay?" Richard watched as Anthony carefully examined each animal, speaking softly to them as if they were children. There was an endless patience in those gestures, a tenderness that went far beyond simply tossing food on the ground. One of the dogs, a medium-sized black mutt, didn't come to eat with the others. It lay under one of the makeshift shelters, breathing heavily. "Hey, Blackie, what's wrong? Not feeling well?" Anthony approached slowly and placed a hand on the animal's head. "You've got a fever, don't you, buddy?" The gardener took a water bottle from his backpack, dampened a cloth, and placed it on the dog's head. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a medicine bottle. "This will help you feel better. It's the antibiotic Dr. Marcus gave me for you." Richard realized Anthony was spending his own money on vet care for these animals. The scale of the commitment the gardener had taken on was far greater than he had initially imagined. He watched for over an hour, and when Anthony finally prepared to leave, he did something that broke Richard's heart. The gardener knelt in the middle of the lot and let all the dogs approach him. He petted each one as if saying goodbye before a long trip. "See you tomorrow, everyone. Sleep well and take care. Daddy will be back early to check on you." Richard felt a lump in his throat. There was a humanity in that gesture he hadn't seen in a long time. When was the last time he himself had shown so much love for anything? The next morning, Richard called Anthony into his office for a formal conversation. The gardener climbed the 3 flights of stairs with his cap in hand, clearly nervous. "Have a seat, Anthony." "Thank you, sir." Richard's office was intimidating: large glass windows, dark wooden furniture, diplomas and awards lining the walls. Anthony looked even smaller, sitting in the leather chair across from the imposing desk. "I know about the dogs," Richard said, getting straight to the point. Anthony lowered his head and sighed. "I figured you'd find out eventually." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I don't know, sir. I thought you'd get mad, fire me." "I need this job." "And you think it's right to leave an hour early every day?" "No, sir. I know it's not right. But they depend on me. If I don't go, they won't have food." Richard stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to Anthony. Below, he could see the impeccably maintained garden the gardener kept. "Do you have children, Anthony?" "I had a daughter, sir." The use of the past tense made Richard turn around. "Had? She's no longer with us. It's been 5 years. I'm so sorry. It was during a flood here in the neighborhood. Our house was in a low area. The water rose too fast. I managed to save my wife, but Gabriella, she was only 8. Richard felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. He hadn't expected such a heavy answer to a seemingly simple question. "And your wife?" "She couldn't take it. The pain was too much. She started drinking, then came the depression. In the end, she left. Said she couldn't look at me without remembering our daughter." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. The silence in the office was heavy. Richard returned to his chair, unsure of what to say. Anthony kept his head down, fidgeting with the cap in his lap. "Is that why you take care of the dogs?" "I guess so, sir. After I lost everything, they started showing up in my life. First, it was just one. I found him hurt near my place. Then others came, and when the shelter closed, I couldn't let them suffer like I did." "But you understand that doesn't justify leaving work early, right?" "I understand, sir. You're right." Richard took a deep breath. He knew he had to make a decision, but somehow that conversation had changed something inside him. "I'll make a deal with you. You can keep taking care of the dogs, but you have to work your full hours. 8 to 5, no exceptions." "But sir, if I leave at 5, I won't have time to feed them before dark. They'll be waiting." "That's the deal, Anthony. Take it or leave it." Anthony stayed silent for a long moment, clearly doing mental calculations. "All right, sir. I accept." "Good. You can go back to work." When Anthony left the office, Richard stood by the window for a long time. He'd done the right thing from a business standpoint, but something in his chest nagged at him. Over the next week, Richard watched Anthony strictly follow the new schedule. The gardener arrived at 8 sharp and didn't leave until after 5. The gardens remained impeccable, but there was something different about the man's demeanor. He seemed more worn down, more worried. One night around 10, Richard was returning from a business dinner when he heard barking. It was a desperate sound, as if the animals were in panic. He followed the noise until he realized it came from the lot where Anthony cared for the dogs. He decided to stop by and see what was happening. He found the lot in chaos. The dogs barked endlessly. Some ran back and forth, others howled while staring at the gate. It was clear they were waiting for someone who hadn't arrived. Richard parked and watched for a few minutes. The animals seemed genuinely distressed. A few even came to the fence and looked at him, as if pleading for help. That's when he saw an elderly woman approaching the lot with a bag in hand. It was Mrs. Henderson, a resident of the complex, nearly 70 years old. who had always been very polite to him. "Mrs. Henderson, what are you doing here at this hour?" The old woman startled at the sight of him, nearly dropping the bag. "Oh, what a fright, Mr. Johnson. I came to feed the little dogs. They're starving." "What do you mean?" "That young man who works in the complex, Anthony. He used to come here every day to take care of them, but it's been a week since he last showed up. The poor things are desperate." Richard felt a heaviness in his stomach. Of course, with the new schedule, Anthony could only leave work when it was already dark, and it probably wasn't safe for him to come here alone at night. "How long have you known about this situation?" "Oh, it's been a while now. I always saw him passing by with the bag of food and decided to ask what it was. When he told me, I was so moved. It's rare to find people with such a good heart." Mrs. Henderson opened the gate with a key Anthony had apparently given her and stepped onto the property. The dogs ran toward her, but Richard could see they were clearly thinner than a week ago. "Easy now, my darlings. Grandma brought you some dinner," she said, starting to distribute the food. Richard watched the scene, impressed by the woman's ease. She knew the names of several of the animals and seemed to have developed a routine with them. "Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you something? Why did you decide to help?" "Oh, Mr. Richard, when you get older, you learn that we take nothing from this life. The only things that remain are the good deeds we've done for others, and these little ones aren't to blame for being born on the streets." "But you come here alone at night, isn't it dangerous?" "My dear, I'm almost 70. I've been through so much in this life that I'm not afraid of anything anymore. Besides, they need me." Richard helped Mrs. Henderson finish distributing the food and then offered to take her back to the complex. "You're very kind. But tell me something. Why did Anthony stop coming here?" Richard hesitated before answering. How could he explain to this woman that he had forbidden the gardener from leaving work early? "It's work schedule issues." "What a shame. He's such a special person. Did you know he spends almost half his salary on food and medicine for these little ones?" Richard didn't know that. The information hit him like a slap in the face. "Half his salary?" "Yes. The other day, while talking to him, I found out he lives in a tiny studio and basically eats rice, beans, and eggs so he can buy better food for them. Once I ran into him at the store buying antibiotics that cost $80. It was the money he'd saved to replace his bike tire." Every word from Mrs. Henderson was like a needle in Richard's conscience. He had judged Anthony for leaving an hour early, never imagining the extent of the man's sacrifice for the animals. "Do you know his little girl died in a flood?" Mrs. Henderson continued. "I think he found in these little ones a way to cope with the pain. It's like the family he lost." Richard stayed silent for the rest of the trip. When he dropped Mrs. Henderson off at the complex, his mind was in turmoil. He had made a decision based on business principles, but hadn't considered the human side of the issue. The next morning, he arrived early to talk to Anthony. He found the gardener tending to the bromeliads, but there was something different in his movements. He seemed slower, more discouraged. "Good morning, Anthony." "Good morning, sir. How are the dogs?" Anthony stopped what he was doing and looked at Richard in surprise. You know they're starving?" "Mrs. Henderson told me. She's trying to help." "Yeah, she's a saint. But it's not the same, sir. She can't carry heavy bags of food, doesn't know the little ones like I do. And at night it's dangerous for a woman her age to walk around there alone." "Why didn't you tell me you were having trouble?" "You made a deal with me. I accepted it. I can't complain now." Richard admired Anthony's stance. Even though he was going through hardships, the man hadn't broken the agreement they'd made. "What if I found a solution that allowed you to take care of the dogs without affecting your work here?" Anthony's eyes lit up for the first time in a week. "What kind of solution, sir?" "I'm still thinking, but answer me one thing. Would you do this for the rest of your life? Take care of these animals?" "I would, sir. They're all I have now." That answer touched Richard in an unexpected way. There was a dedication there he didn't even find in his highest-paid employees. "Let me think about some possibilities. I can't promise anything, but I'll see what I can do." For the rest of the day, Richard couldn't focus on anything else. He cancelled 2 meetings and stayed in his office researching animal shelters, animal protection NGOs, ways to legalize the situation of those dogs. That's when he got an idea. The gated community had an unused area in the back, a large, grassy space originally meant for a pool that was never built. What if he turned that space into an official shelter? The idea seemed crazy at first, but the more Richard thought about it, the more sense it made. It would solve the dog problem, give Anthony better conditions to care for them, and could even be a social initiative that would add value to the community. That night, he decided to talk to Patricia about the idea over dinner. "You want to turn the community into a dog shelter? Dad, have you lost your mind?" "It's not like that, honey. It would be a specific area, well organized, with all the necessary infrastructure. And you think the residents will accept this? They pay a high fee exactly to have an exclusive environment, free of problems. Some might see it as a unique feature, a social initiative, something that gives the community purpose beyond just being a place for wealthy people to live." Patricia looked at her father as if he were a stranger. "Since when do you care about social causes?" The question caught Richard off guard. Really, when was the last time he'd worried about anything besides making money? "Maybe it's time I start caring." "Dad, are you serious? You're going to spend a fortune building a shelter for stray dogs just to solve an employee's problem?" "When you put it that way, it does sound crazy." "Because it is crazy. Dad, if you want to do charity, donate money to an organization. Don't turn our community into a shelter." Richard fell silent, cutting his food mechanically. Patricia had logical arguments, but something stronger than logic was influencing his decision. "What if I told you it's not just about the dogs? What if it's also about Anthony?" "What about Anthony?" "He lost his daughter and wife, honey. He's alone in the world. Those animals are all he has." "Dad, I get that it's sad, but it's not your responsibility to fix your employees' personal lives. It's not my responsibility. But what if it's my humanity?" Patricia stared at her father for a long time, as if trying to decipher a riddle. "What happened to you? You're not usually like this." Richard didn't know how to answer. There really was something different happening to him since he'd learned Anthony's story. It was as if something dormant inside him had awakened. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next day, Richard decided to visit the lot where the dogs were kept during work hours. "I wanted to see the situation up close and better understand the animals' needs." He arrived there around 2 in the afternoon and found Mrs. Henderson trying to fix one of the makeshift shelters that had collapsed due to the rain the night before. "Mrs. Henderson, you shouldn't be doing this alone." "Oh, Mr. Richard, I'm so glad you came. I'm trying to fix this little house here, but I don't have the strength to lift these planks." Richard took off his jacket and helped the woman rebuild the shelter. As they worked, she told him more about each of the animals. "That one over there is Honey. She's pregnant. Anthony's been worried because he doesn't have the money to pay the vet when she has her puppies. And that big one there is Thunder. He protects all the others. He's a bit aggressive with strangers, but with Anthony, he's a lamb." "How do you know all this?" "You know." "Oh, Anthony is very talkative when it comes to the animals. He knows each one's story, which ones are aggressive, which are sick, which are more affectionate. It's amazing." When they finished fixing the shelter, Richard sat on the ground and watched the animals. Some approached him curiously, others kept their distance. There was a clear hierarchy there, an organization that was anything but chaotic. "Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, dear." "Do you have children?" "I had 2, but they live far away now. One is in New York, the other moved to Canada. We hardly see each other." "And your husband?" "He passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." Richard began to understand why Mrs. Henderson had connected so deeply with the animal's cause. Like Anthony, she was also alone and had found in these creatures a way to fill a void. "Don't you feel lonely?" "Oh, Mr. Richard, loneliness comes with age. But when you do something good for others, that emptiness gets smaller." "Do you think it would be feasible to build a proper shelter for these animals?" "Feasible how? Do you mean in terms of money?" "In every sense. Money, space, care, responsibilities." Mrs. Henderson stopped petting one of the dogs and looked at Richard with interest. "Are you thinking of doing something?" "I'm considering a few possibilities." "Look, dear, I don't know much about business, but I know people. And I can tell you that if there's someone capable of taking proper care of these little ones, it would be wonderful. They deserve better than this lot here. And would Anthony be that capable person? Without a doubt. That young man has a gift. I've never seen anyone understand animals the way he does. When Richard returned to the office, his decision was made. He called the architecture firm that had designed his house and scheduled a meeting for the next day. He also decided to call an emergency meeting with all the condo board members to present his proposal. He knew he'd face resistance, but he was determined to try. The meeting with the architect went better than Richard expected. Mark, a creative young man who had worked on social projects before, was excited about the idea. Look, Richard, it's completely feasible. The area you have in the back is perfect for this. We can build individual kennels for sick or aggressive animals, an open area for the more sociable ones, a basic veterinary clinic, a storage space for food, even a visiting area for people who want to adopt. And how much would a project like this cost? To do it right, with all the necessary infrastructure, I'd say around $200,000, but we can do it in phases, start with the essentials, and improve over time. Richard didn't hesitate for a second. Make the full project. I want it to be something that can serve as a model for other condos. Mark smiled. Can I ask what inspired this idea? An employee of mine who lost everything in life and found in animals a reason to keep going. I want to give him the means to do it right. That's a beautiful story. I'll make sure to create something special. The meeting with the board members was more complicated. Richard presented the idea to the 5 representatives of the building's blocks, and the reactions were mixed. Richard, with all due respect, "But this is crazy," said Michael, the board president of Block A. "The residents won't accept dogs barking in the building." "It'll lower the property values," added Sarah from Block B. "What if one of the animals attacks a child?" asked Charles from Block C. But there were supportive voices too. "I think it's interesting," said Mrs. Thompson, the board president of Block D and a 60-year-old woman. "It would be a unique social initiative, and Anthony is a trustworthy person. Besides," Richard added, "I'd cover all construction and maintenance costs. There would be no additional expenses for the building." "Even so," Michael insisted, "you can't make a decision like this unilaterally. You need approval from the General Assembly." Richard knew Michael was right. Even though he owned 40% of the building's apartments, some decisions required a majority vote. "Then let's call an emergency meeting. When can you organize it?" "Richard, are you sure about this?" asked Sarah. "A meeting to discuss stray dogs? The residents will think you've lost your mind." "Let them think that. I have to try." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Richard had 7 days to prepare his presentation and convince the residents that this was a good idea. During those days, he visited the lot every day after work, always accompanied by Mrs. Henderson. He wanted to better understand the animals' routines, their specific needs, and most of all, he wanted to watch Anthony working with them. The gardener was surprised when he saw Richard show up for the first time, but quickly relaxed when he realized he was there to observe, not to scold. "Would you like to feed one of them?" Anthony asked, offering a handful of kibble. "Won't they be wary?" "Thunder over there might be a little suspicious, but the others are calm. Honey loves making new friends." Richard knelt and held out his hand with the kibble. A small yellow dog approached slowly, sniffed his hand, and began to eat. The animal's trust moved him in an unexpected way. "How do you remember all their names?" "Oh, sir, when you spend every day with them, it's easy. Each one has their own personality, their own issues, their own quirks. It's like a family." "And you're not afraid any of them might be aggressive?" "There are 2 or 3 that are a bit fiercer, but it's because they were mistreated before. With patience and kindness, they calm down. Look at Blackie over there, for example." Anthony pointed to a large black dog lying alone in a corner. "When he first got here, he wouldn't let anyone near him. Had scars from beatings all over his body. It took 3 months before he let me touch him. Now he's one of the sweetest." Richard watched the dog Anthony had pointed out. Indeed, the animal seemed peaceful, just more reserved than the others. "How did you know he'd calm down?" "Experience, sir. Animals are like people. When they're mistreated, they get scared. But when they realize they won't suffer anymore, they learn to trust again. That analogy struck Richard deeply. How many people did he know who had closed themselves off after suffering? How many times had he himself become harder after disappointment? Anthony, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, sir. Don't you feel angry at God after everything you've been through? Anthony fell silent for a moment, continuing to distribute food to the animals. I've felt it, sir. Right after I lost Gabriella and my wife left, I was very angry. I even stopped believing in anything. And what changed? These little creatures here. When I started taking care of them, I realized I still had love to give. And when you have love to give, the anger goes away. Richard was struck by the simple wisdom of those words. There was something in Anthony's experience that spoke directly to his soul. And you never thought about remarrying, rebuilding a family? I did, sir. But it's hard. Women my age either already have families or want someone with more financial stability, and I have nothing to offer but hard work and little money. You have other things to offer. How so, sir? You have a good heart. That's worth more than money. Anthony smiled, a sad but sincere smile. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. But the world doesn't work that way. A good heart doesn't pay rent. The night before the meeting, Richard was nervous. He had prepared a full presentation with photos of the current land, blueprints for the shelter project, detailed budgets, everything to show the idea was feasible and well planned. Patricia tried once more to dissuade him. Dad, you can still back out. You don't have to go through this embarrassing situation. It's not embarrassment, sweetheart. It's an opportunity to do the right thing. The right thing for whom? For you, for Anthony, or for the dogs? For all of us. The meeting was held in the condominium's event hall. Richard was surprised by the number of residents who showed up. At least 70 people were present, far more than usual meetings attracted. Good evening, everyone. Richard began his presentation. I know today's topic might seem unusual, but I ask you to hear me out before making any decisions. He told Anthony's story, explained the animals' situation, showed photos of the current land, and presented the shelter project. The investment would be entirely on me, he explained. There would be no additional cost for the condominium, and it would be a chance for us to do something meaningful for our community. The reactions were immediate and divided. This is absurd, shouted a resident from Block B. I didn't pay a fortune for an apartment here to have stray dogs barking next to me. I think it's beautiful, countered a woman from Block C. It's a humanitarian act. What if one of the animals escapes and attacks a child? Asked another resident. The project includes all necessary safety measures, Richard replied. But what about the noise, the smell? Insisted someone from the crowd. The discussion went on for over 2 hours. Richard answered every question, presented technical arguments, spoke about social responsibility, but he could see the meeting was polarized. That's when Mrs. Henderson asked to speak. Everyone, I've lived in this condominium for 12 years. I've seen a lot of changes here, and I can say one of the best changes was when Anthony started tending our gardens. The room fell silent as she spoke. Do you remember how it was before? The gardens always wilted, plants dying, everything neglected. Now we have the most beautiful gardens in the area. And you know why? Because Anthony doesn't just care for the plants. He loves what he does. That doesn't justify turning the condominium into a shelter, Michael retorted. I'm not talking about justification, Mrs. Henderson continued. I'm talking about opportunity. The opportunity to show we're better people than we seem. Her words created a respectful silence in the room. Besides, she added, I've been following Anthony's work with these animals, and I can assure you he has the competence and dedication to run a shelter much better than many institutions out there. But Mrs. Henderson, said Sarah, don't you think this might bother the other residents? Sarah, my dear, do you have young children? I do. And wouldn't you want them to grow up seeing examples of kindness and care for those in need? The question caught Sarah off guard. Of course, but then what better example than this? A simple man who dedicates his life to caring for those who have no one. Mrs. Thompson spoke next. I'd like to add something. My granddaughter is 8 and visits often. Ever since she heard about the puppies, she won't stop asking when she can meet them. Children have a natural sensitivity to these things. And my 15-year-old son, another resident added, has been very rebellious lately. Maybe volunteering with animals would be good for him. Richard noticed the tide was turning. Some residents who initially seemed opposed began asking more technical questions about the project, showing genuine interest. How long would construction take? Someone asked. The architect estimated 3 months for the first phase, which would include basic kennels and the feeding area. And what if one day Anthony can no longer care for the animals? The project includes forming a team of volunteers from among the residents themselves. It wouldn't depend on just one person. Michael, who had been one of the most resistant, made a surprising proposal. Richard, I'll make a counteroffer. How about we start with a pilot project? Bring in 5 or 6 animals, the gentlest ones, build a smaller structure and see how it goes. If it works, we expand. Michael's suggestion pleased many. It was a way to test the idea without fully committing right away. I accept, said Richard. It's a smart way to start. The vote for the pilot project was surprisingly favorable. 43 in favor, 27 against. When the meeting ended, Richard felt relieved and emotional. He hadn't gotten everything he wanted, but he had gotten an opportunity. Mrs. Henderson approached him as the other residents were leaving. Congratulations, my dear. You did the right thing. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You were essential. Now let's hope everything goes well, and you can count on me for anything you need. The next day, Richard arrived early at work to give Anthony the news. He found the gardener trimming the plants at the entrance, softly whistling a tune he didn't recognize. Anthony, I need to talk to you. Good morning, Mr. Richard. Is there a problem? Actually, good news. Last night we had a meeting and approved a pilot project to bring some of your dogs here. Anthony stopped what he was doing and looked at Richard as if he hadn't understood. What do you mean, sir? We're going to build a small shelter here in the complex. You'll be able to care for the animals during work hours without having to leave early. Anthony's eyes filled with tears. He dropped the pruning shears and stood still, unable to speak. Are you okay? I can't believe it, sir. Are you serious? Completely serious. I've already hired an architect, and we have the plans. Construction starts in a month. Anthony knelt on the ground and began to cry. Richard wasn't sure what to do in the face of such emotion. Thank you, Mr. Richard. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. Get up, man. You deserve this and much more. Anthony stood and wiped his tears with the back of his hand. Can I ask you something, sir? Of course. Why did you do this? Why did you risk going to a meeting, spend money, face resistance, all for some stray dogs? Richard thought about the answer. There were several possible responses, but only one was completely honest. Because you taught me that there are still good people in the world, and I wanted to be part of that. The shelter construction began 3 weeks later. Richard made sure to oversee everything personally, and Anthony, whenever possible, offered suggestions based on his experience with the animals. Mr. Richard, wouldn't it be better to make the kennel doors a little wider? Some of the pups are on the bigger side. Of course, Anthony, you know them better than anyone. And here in the bathing area, if we move the drain a bit farther from the wall, it'll be easier to clean. Richard was impressed by the technical knowledge Anthony had developed over 2 years of caring for the animals. Every suggestion made sense and improved the original design. During construction, several residents stopped by to chat and share their thoughts. Most showed positive curiosity, especially the children and the elderly. Uncle Richard, when are the puppies coming? Asked Julie, Mrs. Thompson's 6-year-old granddaughter. Soon, Julie. First, we have to finish their little home. Can I play with them? If your parents say yes and you promise to be very gentle. Patricia also began showing interest, though she tried to hide it. Dad, what breed are the dogs that are coming? They're not purebred, sweetheart. They're mutts. But some might still be cute, right? Richard smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt he was doing something that truly mattered. When the shelter was ready, Richard, Anthony, and Mrs. Henderson went to the lot to choose the 5 animals that would be part of the pilot project. Let's take the gentlest ones, Anthony suggested. Honey, who's pregnant but super affectionate, Bingo, the clown, Luna, who loves cuddles, Toffee, the quiet one, and maybe Blackie. He's big, but very gentle. Are you sure they'll adjust well to the new place? I am, sir. Animals adapt quickly when they feel safe, and there they'll have everything they need. Moving day was emotional. Richard rented a special animal transport van, and several residents gathered to welcome the complex's new inhabitants. Julie was in the front row holding her grandmother's hand and nearly jumping with excitement. "Grandma, will they like me?" "Of course they will, sweetheart. You have a kind heart." When the van arrived, Anthony stepped out first and opened the back door. The 5 dogs emerged curiously, sniffing their new surroundings. The residents' reaction was better than Richard had hoped. Many crouched to pet the animals, and some children were enchanted. "They're beautiful," exclaimed a resident from Block A. "Look how well cared for they are," another remarked. Honey, the pregnant dog, approached Patricia, who had been watching from a distance. The girl hesitated for a moment, but then knelt and began stroking the animal's head. "She really is gentle," Patricia said, surprised. "She's the friendliest of them all," Anthony explained. "Loves making new friends." Richard watched his daughter interact with Honey and felt a deep emotion. It had been so long since he'd seen Patricia show tenderness toward anything. In the following days, the animal's presence completely transformed the complex. Children begged their parents to visit the dogs before school. Elderly residents began taking morning walks that coincidentally passed by the shelter. Even those who had voted against the project grew curious. Michael, one of the most resistant, showed up one morning with a bag of dog food. "Richard, my daughter pestered me so much that I decided to come see these famous dogs." "So what do you think?" "They're better behaved than I expected, and Anthony really knows his stuff." "Did your daughter like it?" "She liked it so much she now wants a dog of her own." "But that's another story," said Michael, laughing. The success of the pilot project was evident. In a month, there wasn't a single formal complaint, and several people had shown interest in expanding the shelter. It was Mrs. Thompson who brought the first official proposal. "Richard, what if we organized another meeting to approve the expansion? I think people are seeing now that it works. Do you think it would pass?" "I'm almost sure. Besides, my sister, who lives in another neighborhood, is interested in doing something similar there. You could become a model for others." The idea of turning the project into a blueprint for other neighborhoods excited Richard. It could be the start of something bigger, a way to solve the problem of abandoned animals in an organized and humane way. The second meeting was very different from the first. The initial resistance had turned into enthusiasm, and the approval to expand the shelter was unanimous. "Now can we bring in all the others?" one asked Anthony, emotional. "As many as we can fit," Richard replied, "and we'll organize adoption campaigns to find homes for those who don't stay here." During the construction of the shelter's second phase, something unexpected happened. Honey gave birth to 5 beautiful, healthy puppies. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, and dozens of people came to see the babies. "They're perfect," exclaimed Julie, watching the puppies nurse. "Can I adopt one when they're older?" asked a teenager who had never shown interest in animals before. "Of course you can," Anthony answered. "But first you need to talk to your parents and learn how to care for them properly." Richard watched the commotion with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine pride. Not pride from making money or closing an important deal, but pride from doing something that truly mattered. Patricia appeared beside him, watching the same scene. "Dad, I need to apologize." "For what?" "For doubting you. This project really is special. What changed your mind?" "Seeing how people have grown closer because of the dogs. Julie, for example, was super shy. Now she talks to everyone who comes to visit the animals." Richard looked around and realized his daughter was right. The shelter had become a natural gathering place for the neighborhood. People who barely greeted each other before now regularly chatted about the animals. "And there's something else," Patricia continued. "I want to adopt Honey." "Really? Really, she's special and I could use the company." Richard was surprised and moved by his daughter's request. Patricia had always been so focused on appearances and status. Seeing her bond with a stray dog was a significant change. Are you sure? Taking care of an animal is a big responsibility. I know, Dad. But watching Anthony, I've learned that responsibility can be joyful when it comes from the heart. When all the animals from the original lot were moved to the new shelter, Richard organized an official opening celebration. He invited other neighborhood managers, representatives from animal protection NGOs, even the local mayor. The party was a success. Many expressed interest in replicating the project, and some donations came in to help with maintenance. During the party, Richard sought out Anthony for a private talk. "How are you feeling about all this?" "It still feels like a dream, Mr. Richard. A year ago, I thought I'd lose all of them. Today, they have their own home, a veterinarian, people who care for them. And you? Are you happy?" "More than happy, sir. For the first time since I lost my family, I feel like I have a purpose in life." "Anthony, I want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "I want to promote you to general coordinator of the project. This wouldn't just involve caring for the animals, but also training other staff, giving talks about the project and helping other communities implement similar shelters." Anthony fell silent for a moment, processing the information. "Does this mean I wouldn't be a gardener anymore?" "You'd still tend to the gardens too, but your main responsibility would be the shelter, with a better salary, of course." "How much better?" 3 times what you earn now." Anthony sat in a nearby chair, clearly moved. "Mr. Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say you accept." "I accept. Of course I accept. But can I ask why? Why are you doing all this for me?" Richard thought about his answer. Over the past few months, he had reflected on this question a lot. "Because you taught me something important, Anthony. You taught me that success isn't just measured by money. Sometimes it's measured by the difference we make in others' lives. But you were already successful before. I was wealthy. It's not the same thing." 6 months after the shelter's opening, Richard was in his office when he received an unexpected call. "Hello, this is the city's Animal Welfare Department. We'd like to partner with you to expand the community shelter project across the region." The call led to a meeting with the secretary, who presented an ambitious proposal, turning the model developed in Richard's community into public policy, creating tax incentives for other communities that wanted to implement similar shelters. "Your project has become a benchmark," the secretary explained. 5 communities have already reached out for guidance on doing something similar. "And what would my role be in this?" "We'd like you and Anthony to be official consultants for the program, help with training, developing guidelines, and supervising the new shelters." Richard accepted the proposal immediately. It was a chance to multiply the impact of what they had built. When he shared the news with Anthony, the now coordinator gardener was amazed. "So we're going to teach others how to do what we did here?" "Exactly. And the best part is, each new shelter will save dozens of animals." "Mr. Richard, a year ago I was desperate, thinking I'd have to abandon my pets. Now I'm going to teach others how to care for theirs. Life really does surprise you sometimes." The municipal program launched 3 months later, with Richard and Anthony as the main speakers. The first presentation was for representatives from 20 interested communities. Richard opened by telling the whole story, from the day he decided to follow Anthony to the creation of the shelter. Then he handed the floor to the gardener. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony, and 5 years ago, I lost everything that mattered most in my life," he began, with a confidence that impressed Richard. "I thought I'd never be happy again, until some abandoned dogs crossed my path. Caring for them taught me that we always have love to give, even when we think we have nothing left." The audience was visibly moved. Anthony continued, "What Mr. Richard did for me and my pets didn't just change our lives, it changed the whole community. Now, people who barely spoke work together as volunteers. Kids learn responsibility by caring for the animals. Seniors have companionship every day. The shelter didn't just bring dogs into the condominium," concluded Anthony. "It brought humanity." By the end of the presentation, 16 of the 20 attending condominiums had signed up to join the program. A year after the municipal program launched, Richard was in the condominium garden watching Anthony train a group of teenage volunteers. The former gardener had become a respected figure in the community, often invited to give talks and interviews. "Remember," he told the young people, "a dog isn't a toy. It's a living being that will depend on you every day for the next 10-15 years. Uncle Anthony, how do we know if a dog is sick?" one of the teens asked. "Good question. You have to watch their behavior. If they stop eating, become unusually quiet, breathe differently, any change could be a sign of trouble." Richard smiled at hearing Uncle Anthony. That's what all the kids and teens in the condominium called him now. Patricia approached with Honey on a leash. The dog had become her inseparable companion, and the change in the young woman's personality was remarkable. She had grown more affectionate, more responsible, more concerned with social causes. "Dad, did you see that the neighboring condominium opened their shelter last week?" "I did. Anthony went there to give a talk to the residents. And there's another one interested in Beverly Hills. It seems like the project is becoming a trend." Richard looked around. The shelter now housed 15 dogs, all healthy and well cared for. Several had been adopted by residents of the condominium itself. Others received regular visits from families interested in adoption. Mrs. Henderson approached, carrying a bag of new toys for the animals. "Mr. Richard, have you seen today's paper? There's an article about our project." "I haven't yet. Is it good?" "Wonderful. It talks about how the program has already rescued over 200 animals across the region." 200 animals. Richard did the math in his head. Each one had a story, a life that had been saved, and it all started with a gardener who left work an hour early to feed a few strays. That evening at dinner, Patricia asked a question that caught Richard by surprise. "Dad, do you regret anything about the project?" "What do you mean?" "I don't know. The investment was high, you faced resistance, had to change the condominium's routine. Do you regret any of it?" Richard thought for a moment. The project had cost over $300,000 in construction and first-year maintenance. It had sparked debates, demanded time and energy, completely altered his routine. "I regret just one thing," he finally said. "What?" "Not doing it sooner." Patricia smiled. "You know what I've learned from all this, Dad?" "What?" "That money is important, but purpose is everything. Before I thought success was about having things. Now I know success is about doing things that matter." Richard felt proud of his daughter. Her transformation had been as profound as his own. "And are you thinking of doing something with what you've learned?" "I am. I want to study veterinary medicine. I'm thinking of using part of my inheritance to open a low-cost clinic with affordable prices for people like Anthony." Patricia's idea moved Richard deeply. Seeing his daughter develop social awareness and a desire to help others was better than any financial success he'd ever achieved. 2 years after the project began, Richard received an unexpected invitation. The state government wanted to implement the shelter program in condominiums across all major cities in the state. The meeting would be in Washington, D.C., with the governor in attendance. "Anthony, they want you to come too. Would you be up for a trip to Washington, D.C.? "Me, sir? Talk to the governor?" "You're the one who understands this subject the most. Your experience is crucial." Anthony got nervous at the prospect, but ended up agreeing. It was the first time he would travel by plane, the first time he would leave the state. The meeting in Washington, D.C. felt surreal to Richard. Being there representing a project that had started from such a simple situation, an employee leaving work early, felt like something out of a movie. The governor listened attentively to the presentation and asked technical questions about costs, maintenance, and regulations. Anthony answered with the authority of someone who lives the daily reality of shelters. "Do you believe this can be replicated on a large scale?" the governor asked. "I do, Your Excellency," Anthony replied, "but it has to be done with care, not just as public policy." The little ones can tell when we truly care about them. The simplicity and sincerity of his answer impressed everyone present. The state program was approved with an initial investment of $2 million. Richard and Anthony were hired as lead consultants, responsible for training teams in 50 cities. On the flight back to Miami, Richard looked at Anthony, who was gazing out the window at the clouds with an expression of awe. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about my daughter, sir. If she were alive, she'd be so proud to see her dad talking to the governor about saving little animals." Richard felt a lump in his throat. Even with all the success and recognition, Anthony still carried the pain of losing his daughter. "Do you think she would have approved of the project?" "She would, yes. Gabriella always loved animals. She kept asking me to bring a dog home, but back then I couldn't afford it. Maybe all of this is her way of still caring for animals through you." Anthony smiled through his tears. "Could be, Mr. Johnson. Could be." 3 years after the project began, the shelter in Richard's neighborhood had become a center of excellence for abandoned animal care. It welcomed visits from veterinary students, researchers, and public officials from other countries. Anthony now had a team of 5 people working with him, including a full-time veterinarian. What had started as a personal need had turned into a small social enterprise. "Mr. Johnson, we got an interesting proposal today," Anthony said, walking into the office with a folder of documents. "What kind of proposal?" "A university in Canada wants to fund a study on our model. They think it could be replicated in other countries. Would you be willing to participate in an international study?" "I would, yes, but only if they understand it's not just about technique. It's about real love." Richard smiled. Even with all the recognition and growth, Anthony had never lost the simple human essence that made his work special. "And there's something else," Anthony continued. "A publisher wants us to write a book telling our story." "A book? Would you be up for it?" "If it helps more animals, I'm up for anything." The idea of the book excited Richard. It would be a way to document their entire journey and inspire others to develop similar projects. 6 months later, The Gardener and the Dogs, A Story of Transformation, was released nationwide. The book told the full story, from the day Richard decided to follow Anthony to the national expansion of the program. The launch took place in the neighborhood itself, with over 200 people in attendance, including journalists, officials, and residents from various communities that had implemented similar shelters. "I never imagined I'd be a co-author of a book one day," Anthony said during his launch speech. "But if this story inspires even one person to help an abandoned animal, it will have been worth it." The book became a bestseller in the social action category, and the royalties were entirely donated to animal protection NGOs. During the book signing, Richard noticed Anthony talking to a young veterinarian who had come to learn about the project. "Dr. Anthony, could you give me some tips on how to set up a shelter in my city?" Richard smiled at hearing Dr. Anthony. The former gardener was now respected and consulted by professionals across the country, even though he had never set foot in a university. Patricia, who had just finished her first year of veterinary school, approached her father during the event. "Dad, did you see how many people came today?" "I did. It's amazing how the story has touched so many. You know what impresses me the most? How Anthony is still the same humble person, even with all this recognition." "That's true. Success hasn't changed his core." "Or yours, Dad. You're still the same person too, just better." Richard hugged his daughter, moved. Their journey had transformed them all in ways they never imagined possible. 5 years after that first day when he decided to follow Anthony, Richard stood in the condominium garden, watching a scene that repeated every morning. Dozens of children and adults visiting the shelter before starting their daily routines. The place had become much more than an animal shelter. It was a community center where people of all ages gathered, shared experiences, and developed social projects. Mrs. Henderson, now 75, led a knitting group that made blankets for the animals in winter. Julie, now 11, ran a kids' animal protection club. Michael, once a critic of the project, had become one of its biggest advocates and helped with fundraising. "Mr. Richard," Julie called, running toward him. "Come see. Luna had puppies." Richard followed the girl to the shelter, where Luna, one of the first residents, had given birth to 4 perfect puppies. Anthony knelt beside the mother, checking if they were all healthy. "Everything okay?" Richard asked. "Perfect," Anthony replied with his usual proud smile. 4 more lives that'll get the chance to be happy." Richard took in the scene, Anthony tending to the puppies, Julie asking questions about caring for newborn dogs. Mrs. Henderson knitting a small blanket, and other residents arriving to see the newborns. It was hard to believe all this had started with his frustration over an employee leaving work an hour early. "Anthony," Richard said, "have you ever stopped to think where we'd be today if I hadn't decided to follow you that day?" "I think about it all the time, Mr. Richard. I probably would have lost my job for leaving early. The little ones would have gone hungry, and none of this would exist. And I'd still be a businessman who only cared about profit. You weren't a bad person, Mr. Richard. You were just lost, like I was after losing my family." "And do you think we found our way?" Anthony looked around, watching the bustle of people caring for the animals, talking, smiling. "I think so, sir. I think we found something better than a path. We found a purpose." Richard smiled. Anthony was right. They hadn't just solved the problem of abandoned animals, they had built a community, a model of how different people could work together for a common cause. Just then, his phone rang. It was the state program coordinator calling with news. "Richard, we've got a special invitation. The UN wants to present our model at the World Conference on Animal Welfare in Geneva." "The UN? Our project has gotten international attention." "It sure has. They consider it an innovative example of how community initiatives can solve complex social problems." Richard hung up the phone in shock. From a gardener leaving work early to the UN in 5 years, life truly was unpredictable. "Any news?" asked Anthony, noticing his surprised expression. "The UN wants us to present our project at a world conference." "The UN? That organization that takes care of the whole world?" "The very same." Anthony fell silent for a few seconds, processing the information. "So you mean our little animals are going to help animals all over the world?" "It's a possibility." "Then let's go, Mr. Richard. Let's teach the world that love knows no borders." The conference in Geneva was a turning point in Richard and Anthony's lives. They presented the project to delegates from 80 countries, and the interest was overwhelming. Several nations requested guidance to implement similar programs. On the last day of the conference, Richard and Anthony were at a cafe in the airport, waiting for their flight back to the United States. "Anthony, can I ask you something I've always wanted to ask?" "Of course, sir." "Do you forgive me for being so hard on you at the beginning, for threatening to fire you because of the dogs?" Anthony smiled. "Mr. Richard, if you hadn't done that, maybe none of this would have happened. Sometimes people need a little push to do the right thing." "But weren't you angry?" "I was, at the time. But then I realized you were just being honest, and honesty is a good quality even when it hurts." "And now? How do you see me today?" "Today you're much more than my boss. You're my partner, my friend, and the person who taught me that life can always surprise you for the better." Richard felt his eyes well up. The journey had turned their professional relationship into a sincere and lasting friendship. "And do you know what the best outcome of all this was?" Anthony continued. "What?" "I discovered I could have a family again, not the same as the one I lost, but just as important. A family made of people I chose to love, and little animals who chose me to care for them." On the flight back, Richard looked out the window and reflected on the entire journey. 5 years earlier, he was a financially successful businessman, but emotionally empty. Now, beyond financial success, he had something money could never buy: the certainty that his life had made a difference. When they arrived in the United States, they were greeted by an airport committee and a small crowd of journalists. The project had gained national attention after their participation in the UN conference. "How does it feel to represent the United States at an international conference?" a reporter asked. "Honored," Richard replied, "but the most important thing isn't the recognition. It's knowing that every rescued animal now has a dignified life." "And you, Anthony? How does it feel to see a project that started so small gain worldwide recognition?" "It's surreal," Anthony answered. "But it's also proof that when you do things with love, they grow beyond what you can imagine." Back at the condominium, they were welcomed with a surprise party organized by the residents. Banners reading "Welcome Home," "Our Ambassadors" decorated the garden, and a small band played live music. Richard was moved to see how the community had come together to welcome them. Those people were no longer just neighbors, they were partners in a shared cause. During the party, Mrs. Henderson approached with a special surprise. "Anthony, there's someone here who's been missing you terribly." It was Honey, the dog Patricia had adopted, but who always showed a special bond with Anthony. The animal ran toward him and jumped into his arms, as if understanding he had returned from an important journey. "I missed you all too," said Anthony, petting several animals that came near. "But I have good news. We're going to have special visitors in a few months." "What kind of visitors?" asked Patricia. "Delegates from other countries want to come see our shelter in person, and there's an even bigger surprise." Richard smiled, knowing what the surprise was. "Tell us already, Anthony." "An international foundation approved funding of $1 million to expand our project across Latin America." The news sparked an explosion of celebration among everyone. $1 million meant they could multiply the project in dozens of cities and countries. Later, when the party ended and everyone went home, Richard and Anthony stayed alone at the shelter, watching the animals settle in for the night. "You know what amazes me the most about all this?" said Richard. "What?" "How something that started with my frustration turned into the most important thing I've ever done in my life." "It's because sometimes the best things come from the most unlikely moments," Anthony replied. "Who would have thought a poor gardener and a wealthy businessman would become partners to change the world?" "We didn't change the world, Anthony. We just did our part." "And isn't that what changes the world, Mr. Johnson? One person doing their part, then another, then another." Richard fell silent, admiring Anthony's simple wisdom. The man was right. Real change began with small actions from ordinary people. "Anthony, can I confess something?" "Of course." "In the last 5 years, I've learned more about life from you than in 40 years of business experience. And I've learned that it's still possible to have hope, even after losing everything." The two stayed quiet for a few minutes, taking in the peace of the shelter at night. The animals slept soundly, safe and loved. It was exactly what Anthony had always dreamed for them. "So, what now?" asked Richard. "What's the next step?" "Now we keep doing what we've always done, taking care of those in need, one life at a time, but on a much bigger scale. A bigger scale, but with the same love as always. Because in the end, Mr. Johnson, it doesn't matter if it's 5 dogs or 5,000. What matters is that each one feels loved." Richard smiled. Anthony was right, as usual. The secret to the project's success wasn't in the technology, money, or recognition. It was in the genuine love every animal received. "You know what I'm going to do tomorrow?" said Richard. "What?" "I'm going to start working on a permanent foundation to ensure this project continues for generations." "A foundation?" "Yes, I want 50 years from now, when neither of us is here anymore, there will still be people caring for abandoned animals with the same kindness you show today." Anthony was moved by the idea. "What will you call the foundation?" Richard thought for a moment. "The Animal Hope Foundation." "What do you think?" "Perfect. Hope is exactly what you gave back to me." 6 months later, the Animal Hope Foundation was officially established, with Richard as president and Anthony as technical director. The first international project would be implemented in Colombia, with direct guidance from the duo. On the day of their trip to Bogotá, Richard was at the airport with Anthony, Patricia, and the whole team that had formed over the years. "Dad, are you nervous?" asked Patricia. "A little. It's the first time we're implementing the project outside the United States." "It'll work out," said Anthony with his usual confidence. "Love doesn't speak a different language." During the flight, Richard reflected on the entire journey. From a businessman focused only on profits, he had become an advocate for social causes. From an authoritarian relationship with employees, he had built partnerships based on mutual respect and shared purpose. But the biggest transformation hadn't been professional. It had been personal. He'd learned that real happiness came from making a difference in others' lives, not from accumulating wealth. In Bogotá, they were welcomed by a delegation from the Colombian government and representatives from several gated communities interested in the project. The first presentation was at a luxury hotel for an audience of business people and officials. Richard opened the presentation, but soon handed the floor to Anthony, who had become the project's great communicator. "Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony began in his newly learned Spanish. "My name is Anthony Johnson, and 6 years ago, I was just a gardener secretly taking care of a few stray dogs." The audience fell silent, hanging on every word. "Today, I'm here speaking to you because one man decided it was important to understand why I left work early instead of simply firing me." Anthony told the whole story, from the vacant lot to the UN conference. His sincerity and passion were evident, and by the end of the presentation, the audience rose to their feet, applauding. 12 gated communities immediately signed up to participate in the pilot program in Colombia. During the week they spent in Bogotá, Richard and Anthony visited local shelters, saw the reality of abandoned animals in the city, and trained the first Colombian team. "It's amazing how the problems are the same everywhere," Richard remarked. "And so are the solutions," Anthony replied. "Love and dedication work in any country." On their last day in Bogotá, they visited a municipal shelter that was overcrowded and underfunded. The situation was heartbreaking. Hundreds of animals crammed together without proper care, many of them sick. "This is what we want to prevent," Richard told the Colombian team. "When animals are crowded without individual attention, it's not protection, it's just storage." "That's why our model works," Anthony added. "Fewer animals, lots of love, personalized care." The visit to the municipal shelter strengthened everyone's conviction about the importance of the work they were doing. Back in the United States, they found the community celebrating. During their absence, 3 of the shelter dogs had been adopted by families from other states who had learned about the project through the book. "And there's an even bigger surprise," Mrs. Henderson said mysteriously. "We got an offer for a documentary." "A documentary?" "That's right. A production company wants to make a film about our story. They've already talked to the residents. Everyone agreed to participate." The idea of the documentary excited Richard. It would be another way to spread the project and inspire others. The documentary, The Shelter, was filmed over 3 months, following the daily routine of the shelter, interviewing residents and telling the whole story from the beginning. The premiere was held at the city's largest theater, with proceeds going to the Animal Hope Foundation. The film moved the audience and received excellent reviews. More important than the documentary's success was the impact it had. Dozens of cities reached out, wanting to implement similar projects. A year after the documentary's premiere, Richard was in his office when he received a call that would change the course of their lives once again. "Richard, this is the Department of State. We have a special proposal for you and Anthony." "What kind of proposal?" "The US government wants to include your project in the International Cooperation Program. It would be a way to export American social innovation to other countries." "What exactly would that mean?" "It would mean government funding to implement the project in at least 10 countries over the next 3 years." Richard fell silent, absorbing the magnitude of the proposal. "Can I discuss it with my team and get back to you?" "Of course. But I'll say up front that the government is very interested. You've become an international success story." When Richard told the proposal to Anthony, the former gardener grew thoughtful. "Mr. Richard, won't this take our focus away from here, from our little animals?" "It doesn't have to. We can form teams to handle the international expansion while keeping our base here." "And do you think we can maintain the quality of our work while growing so much?" It was a legitimate concern. The bigger the project got, the greater the risk of losing the essence that made it special. "We'll have to set strict criteria. Only expand to places where we're sure the work will be done with the same dedication." "And how do we ensure that?" "By training people who think like you, who see each animal as an individual, not a number." After several meetings with the team and the residents of the community, they decided to accept the government's proposal, but with clear conditions. Every new project would have to go through an evaluation period, with direct oversight from Richard and Anthony. The international cooperation was officially launched a year later. The first country to receive the project was Canada, followed by Puerto Rico, Panama, and Costa Rica. Richard and Anthony began traveling regularly, but they always returned to the community, which remained the heart of the project. "You know what makes me proudest in all this?" Richard said to Anthony during one of their morning walks through the shelter. "What?" Seeing how the people here in the community have become ambassadors for the project, Patricia has already trained veterinarians in 3 countries. Mrs. Henderson became a consultant in community organizing. Even Michael is giving talks on resource mobilization. It's true. Everyone found their own way to contribute. And you? Are you happy with how things have turned out? Anthony stopped in front of the kennel where Luna rested with her puppies, now 3 months old. More than happy, Mr. Richard. I feel fulfilled. I never imagined taking care of little animals could have such an impact. It wasn't just taking care of animals. It was teaching people to be better. Maybe. But to me, the most important thing is still them, Anthony said, pointing to the animals. Everything else is a consequence. Richard smiled. Even with all the international recognition, Anthony kept the simplicity and focus that made his work special. Just then, Julie arrived, now 15 and one of the shelter's top volunteers. Uncle Anthony, Uncle Richard, the photos from the project in Costa Rica are here. Want to see? Of course, they answered together. Julie showed the photos on her phone. A beautifully built shelter, well cared for animals, families adopting puppies, children learning about animal care. It's exactly like ours, Julie said excitedly. Not exactly, Anthony corrected. It's inspired by ours, but every place has its own uniqueness. What's the difference? The difference is that every animal is still unique. Every caregiver has their own story. Every community has its specific needs. Richard admired Anthony's wisdom once again. Even with the project's expansion, he never lost sight of the importance of individuality and personalized care. 7 years after that first day when he decided to follow Anthony, Richard was in his office preparing a report on the project's global impact. The numbers were impressive. Over 3,000 animals rescued, 50 shelters in operation, 200 direct jobs created, thousands of people involved as volunteers. But the numbers that made him proudest were others. 0 animals euthanized in the project's shelters, a 95% adoption rate, 100% of animals receiving regular veterinary care. Dad, have you seen the news? Patricia said, walking into the office with a tablet in hand. What news? The project won the International Social Innovation Award. You'll be honored in New York. Richard looked at the tablet screen. It was true. Among hundreds of projects from around the world, the Hope Shelter had been chosen as the most innovative and effective in its category. New York? Another international award? And this time it's the most important one. There will be worldwide media coverage. Richard grew thoughtful. Recognition was important, but sometimes he felt the focus was shifting away from what truly mattered. Dad, aren't you excited? I am, sweetheart, but I'm also worried. About what? About not losing the essence of the project, about not turning this into an award machine and forgetting the animals. Patricia understood her father's concern. It was a real risk when social projects gain too much visibility. What if you used this award to reinforce the project's values, to show that success comes precisely from individual care, from genuine love? Patricia's suggestion made sense. Instead of seeing the award as a problem, they could use it as an opportunity to strengthen the project's core message. The ceremony in New York was elegant and well-attended. Richard and Anthony shared the stage with awardees from other countries, all representing innovative initiatives in their fields. When it was their turn to speak, Richard decided to break protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, I could talk about numbers, social impact, replicability, but I'd rather tell a simple story. Richard recounted the day he decided to follow an employee who left work early, the discovery of abandoned dogs, and the transformation the project brought to everyone involved. The award we receive today isn't ours, he said. It belongs to every person who chose to love an abandoned animal, every child who learned about compassion, every community that came together for a common cause. Then he passed the microphone to Anthony. My name is Anthony Johnson, and 8 years ago, I was a man who had lost everything. Today, I stand here representing not just the US project, but all the unsung caregivers who dedicate their lives to protecting those who can't defend themselves. Anthony spoke about the responsibility that came with recognition, the importance of staying focused on what truly mattered, and love as the engine of social change. "This award isn't the end of our journey," he concluded. "It's just confirmation that we're on the right path." The audience rose in applause. Many approached after the ceremony, eager to learn more about the project. On the flight back to the United States, Richard glanced at Anthony, who slept peacefully in the seat beside him. This humble man, who had started by secretly caring for a few abandoned dogs, was now internationally recognized as a social innovator. But what impressed Richard most was that all the recognition hadn't changed Anthony's essence one bit. Back at the shelter, they were greeted with another surprise celebration. This time, representatives from all the international projects had traveled especially to join the festivities. "It's moving to see how the project has created a worldwide network of people connected by the same purpose," Richard remarked to Mrs. Henderson, now nearly 80 but still active at the shelter. "And the most beautiful part is that each place keeps its own identity, yet everyone shares the same values," she replied. During the party, Richard watched children of various nationalities playing with the animals, adults from different cultures exchanging veterinary care tips, and seniors from diverse countries sharing stories about their local projects. It was exactly what he had dreamed of when it all began. A global community united by love for animals and mutual care. That night, when everyone had already left, Richard and Anthony stayed alone at the shelter, as they often did. "Anthony, can I ask you something I've always wanted to ask?" "You always can, Mr. Johnson. Do you ever miss the days when it was just you and the dogs on the property, when everything was simpler?" Anthony thought for a long time before answering. "Sometimes I do. It was more intimate, more personal. But then I remember how many little animals we've managed to save since then, and I realize it's worth it. And if you could go back in time, would you do anything differently?" "I'd change just one thing." "What?" "I would have told you about the animals from the very first day. That way I'd have spared myself those weeks of worry, thinking I'd get fired." Richard laughed. "And I'd do things differently too. I would have asked sooner instead of getting irritated and suspicious. But it all worked out in the end, didn't it? Sometimes the crooked path leads to the right place." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the animals sleep peacefully. It was a moment of peace and gratitude that repeated itself often, even amid the hustle of their international projects. "Yeah, you know what amazes me most about this whole story?" Richard said. "What?" "How something that started with my irritation became the source of my greatest joy. That's because sometimes we need a little push to discover who we really are," Anthony replied. "You've always had kindness in your heart. You just needed a chance for it to show. And you've always had wisdom. You just needed someone to recognize it. Maybe that's why we met, Mr. Johnson, to help each other be better." Richard smiled. Anthony was right. Their partnership had been mutually transformative. Richard had found purpose. Anthony had found recognition. Together, they had created something greater than either could have achieved alone. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're following us from. If you have something to share, leave us a sincere comment. What moved you most about Richard and Anthony's journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.